Good Tuesday morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. And I hate to channel Jim Morris Sr. so early in the morning on you, but some of you guys, for some reason, I don't really understand why, want to talk about the playoffs. And I gotta be perfectly honest, I don't understand why we should be talking playoffs right now. We just lost a shutout game. We got shut out for the first time in 10 years. You're 3-6. You're at the bottom of your division. There is one team in the entire conference with a worse record than you. One team is worse than you in record. And you guys want to talk playoffs. So, I've made my position on that known recently, which is basically if this team can go on that magical run, great. If this team can back into the playoffs because the rest of the conference is so bad, then so be it. But I just don't understand why you'd even talk about it right now. Right now, after a string of football games where we've done nothing but lose outside of the one game against a terrible team that was basically a free win. So whether or not the playoffs happen, I don't know why you even want to talk about it right now, but we're going to go ahead and talk about the playoffs. Got to talk about the playoffs a little bit here because I know you guys do, and it seems to me that the crux of the argument for continuing to discuss the potential of the Seahawks making the playoffs is basically, well, the conference is bad. We have a lot of below average teams in this conference. And it is possible, many people say in my comments and streams, that this team could go 9-8, maybe even 8-9, and get in. And from there, who the hell knows what happens. That seems to be the general argument right now. So at least it's not coming from a place of, oh, we're going to get hot, run the table, kick everyone's butt, and just go on some dominant Tampa Bay or I don't even know, Baltimore 2012 type run. But that seems to basically be where it comes from. It's the easy remaining schedule combined with a weak conference, and people think, hey, we can back in with 9 wins, maybe even 8 wins, and then who the hell knows what happens. But is that something that we even really want? First of all, we have to discuss whether or not it's likely to happen. And maybe about 30 something hours ago, it seemed like it was going that way. But the last 30 hours, if we're being straight honest, it hasn't been great. Washington won a game, Philly won a game, Minnesota won a game, the Panthers won a game, the 49ers. I mean, I loved watching it, don't get me wrong. That was a grand old time I had tonight or last night watching it, but 49ers won, which doesn't really help anything. And a lot of these teams play each other down the stretch. So I don't know if we can safely assume that a lot of these teams that are below average, and this conference is full of teams that are somewhere between below average and bad. I don't know if we can safely assess that they're all just going to completely fall to pieces down the stretch and leave room for the Seahawks to get in with 8 or 9 wins. But still, it's not a very good conference. We have the division leaders. We have the Rams, who, by the way, have gotten blown out 2 games in a row. Don't adjust your dials. Do not adjust your television set. It really happened. I watched it too. Then you maybe have the Saints if they can get a real quarterback, but as of right now, doesn't seem like it. And it's 50 feet of crap, man. So yeah, okay. This team could back into the playoffs. And if you look at the remaining schedule, what I mean by that is we've got 3 wins. We got games against Washington, San Francisco, Houston, Chicago, and Detroit. These are all games that Seattle will probably be favored to win. And even in their not very good state, even if they're as bad as they looked in some of these games, they can probably win all 5 of those games And that gets you to 8 wins. So whether or not you can get to 9 wins may very well come down to what happens in Week 18. Does Arizona rest their starters? Does Arizona have anything to play for? If they don't, which is possible, they currently have a game plus a tiebreaker lead in the division. Green Bay is the only real potential thorn in the way of them getting to rest their starters and already having the 1 seed locked up in Week 18. But it is possible that Arizona rests their starters. You get a basically free win in that game, and then you get to 9-8. 9-8 has a good chance of being good enough for a 7 seed, probably, maybe 6 seed. But we're probably thinking about a let's call it a 7 seed. That can happen, but is that something that we really want to happen, guys? One thing that I've said a lot in my recent videos when talking about the Seahawks is you got to get some skins on the wall at some point. And if you take a look at our wins so far this year, the best team we've beaten is probably Indianapolis. And Indianapolis is a decent team, but I've looked at their schedule. They are probably an 8-win team. They're probably going to go 8-9. That's probably about where they're going to land. If they veer one way or the other, then of course there's certainly room for them to go up or down. But I'm seeing an 8-win team. Frisco's not bad either, but if you look at their remaining schedule as well as their general inconsistency, they're probably an 8-win team as well. Maybe 7 wins, honestly. I think they're closer to that than they are to a winning team. So we haven't beaten anybody good yet. And I just laid out this blueprint to where you could get all the way through the season, get to 9 wins without beating anybody good, and then yes, you back in. But I'm just trying to figure out why people want this. Because they point to recent teams, or any team historically. There have been a few teams that have not had a dominant regular season, but then proceeded to get on a run in the playoffs and go win the Super Bowl. And they point to these examples, and we're going to go through those examples in this video, and they say, hey, it happened to them, why can't it happen to us? Why can't we be the team that squeaks into the playoffs and gets hot and wins the Super Bowl because they were playing their best football at the best possible time? And my reply to that was always, well, maybe those teams didn't have great regular seasons, but they at some point had an impressive game. They had an impressive result. They had a game against a good team where they took care of business and proved that on their best day, they could compete with anybody. But then I started thinking, I was like, is that actually true? Am I just saying that because it's a cliche? Am I just saying that because I feel like it's true? So I decided to actually do my homework here, really dig into a history of teams that won the Super Bowl after having a less than great regular season. Because we all know the Super Bowl winning teams that win 14 games, 15 games, 13 games, even 12 games. Most Super Bowl champions are elite regular season teams. But I wanted to take a look at a history of the teams that won the Super Bowl without having these dominant regular seasons. And I wanted to see if that was actually the case. Is it possible, has it been done before, that a team has sleepwalked their way through a regular season and then just turned it on in the playoffs and gone and won a Super Bowl? So we got a lot of tabs to get through here. I'm going to try to keep it brief, but here's a history of teams getting hot at the right time. We're going to start in 1967 with the Green Bay Packers. So we go way back to Super Bowl II. This Packers team only went 9-4-1, so they were not dominant. They did win their division. You had to win your division back then to make the playoffs, but that was not a great Packers team. 9-4-1, that's somewhere between a 10 and 11 win team in the modern NFL with the modern schedule. But if you take a look at their schedule, you will see that a lot of their wins came against substandard opponents. However, you did have them put their footprint on the season in week number 9 against the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns would go on to win their division and make the playoffs. Of course, back then, you could only make the playoffs by winning your division. The Browns were a good team in 1967. Packers beat them 55-7. So, yeah, the Packers didn't have their best season, but with a game like this, you knew that they were legitimate. You knew that they could go up against the best and not only win, but crush them. And they went on to get hot at the right time and win the Super Bowl. The 1980 Oakland Raiders were the next team that had a substandard regular season and then got hot at the end. You will notice, by the way, that this trend of teams kind of hitting the snooze button in the regular season and then getting hot in the playoffs is kind of recent. It didn't happen that often in the old days, partially because it was harder to make the playoffs. But I think there are other reasons too, actually. I think that the recent phenomenon of non-dominant teams going on a Super Bowl run is something that has to do with the way the modern NFL is handled, the way the modern football player is managed. I think there is something to say there. And that's a discussion for another time. But the 1980 Oakland Raiders went a respectable 11-5. And they actually didn't even win their division. They got in as a wild card. And they won 4 games in the playoffs and won the Super Bowl. So, did they beat anybody good on the way? Actually, yes. They only really had one impressive game. They went up against the San Diego Chargers. R.I.P. Rest in peace, San Diego Chargers. Beat them by 2 touchdowns in Week 6. They actually split the season series with the Chargers. The Chargers would actually win the division that year. So, Oakland only really beat one team of merit, a good team in 1980, but they did get that one win. They did show in that one game that they could compete with the best. Okay, 1987, the next team that didn't have a great regular season and got hot at the end, the 87 Redskins. And 11-4, that's right on the fence, right? I think that 11-4, you're right on the line. That's a good record. This was the strike season. They only played 15 games. So 1987, you could debate whether or not this really counts, but I'm going to go ahead and include it in this video. Who did this team beat? Did this team beat anybody good on the way to their Super Bowl run? Actually, this is one of the best examples of a team not really accomplishing much in the regular season and getting hot at the end. The Redskins' best win in 1987 was last game of the season, Week 16, against the Minnesota Vikings. In overtime by 3 points. The Minnesota Vikings would finish 8-7. That was the best record of any team the Redskins beat in 1987. So, that's not very good. However, this was the strike season, and I want to say that there was a lot of funky stuff happening this season. A lot of football historians kind of take this season with a grain of salt, so I wouldn't read too much into this. But if you want to say that this team didn't really do anything in the regular season and then got hot at the end, then you might have a leg to stand on. I looked at their schedule. They beat up on a lot of bad teams, and they beat up on a lot of below average teams, like 8-win teams, 7-win teams. It's not great. So, okay, we found one passable example, the 87 Redskins. Next year, we have a better example. The 1988 San Francisco 49ers would go 10-6, good, but far from great, and they would end up winning the Super Bowl anyway, partially because they were still able to win their division despite only going 10-6, but nevertheless, you wouldn't expect a 10-6 team to win the Super Bowl necessarily. But here's the thing, even though they only went 10-6, not a very good record, they put skins on the wall. By my count, 4 of them. Week 1, they beat the Saints by a point. Very close game, very competitive game. The Saints in 1988 would end up going 10-6. Good team, respectable team. The next week, they beat the Giants. The Giants would go on to go 10-6 as well. Another pretty good team. Much later in the season, week 7, they would beat the Rams. The Rams would go on to win 10 games as well, second in the division, another good team. And finally, the 49ers would also beat the Vikings late in that season, the Vikings would end up going 11-5. Very solid team. So that Niners team was not great. They lost a lot of games, but they showed multiple times that season that they were one of the best teams in the league. Oh, I think I left a game out here. Excuse me. My apologies. They also beat the Saints a second time. So they actually swept a good Saints team on top of everything else that I just said. So that Niners team, they had some real skins on the wall. So there was reason to believe that they could beat the best teams because of what they did that regular season despite the loss total. Okay, now we come to the current millennium, the 2001 New England Patriots. This is a great example of a team that didn't really find their way until the playoffs. They went 11-5. They won a bad division. They got very lucky in the playoffs with the matchups they drew and some of the things that went their way. Yeah, sure, but they won the Super Bowl after an 11-5 record. So who did they beat on the way? Did they beat anybody good? Because they did sweep the Colts, but the Colts were bad that year because they lost Edgerrin James to an ACL injury or whatever it was. So, did they beat anybody good? Yes, eventually. They beat the Jets by a point. The Jets in 2001 ended up going 10-6 and making the playoffs, so they were a pretty good team. They also, late in the season, won a close game against the Miami Dolphins, who were actually trending to win the division for most of the season, and ended up going 11-5, same as New England. So they did get those 2 wins in impressive fashion. So they did manage to hang a couple of skins on the wall. So we've been through several old examples. All these examples are 20 years old or more. But you see it. These teams that get hot at the end, they don't just sleep the whole regular season and only beat the bad or mediocre teams, except for maybe that one Redskins team, but even that was a strike year, so whatever. I'm talking about actually showing that you belong at the big boy table at some point, even if you don't consistently keep it up the whole season. The 2005 Pittsburgh Steelers, our old nemesis, 11-5 record. Wild card team. Not a great regular season. Got hot at the end, won the Super Bowl. Did they beat anybody good at any point during this regular season? Yes. They beat up on the Bengals. The Bengals would go on to win their division that year at 11-5. The Bengals were solid this year. They actually won the division from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh split the season series. They showed they could beat a good team. And later in the season, the Steelers got one in on the Bears. The Bears ended up as the 2 seed in the NFC. I think they went 11-5. Respectable Bears team. Pretty good win. So they obviously, the 2005 Steelers did not have a great regular season, but you're seeing these skins on the wall. The 2007 Giants. Now here's an interesting example. This might be one of the purest examples of all time. This Giants team that won the Super Bowl went 10-6, had a barely positive point differential, and didn't really beat anybody good. I took a look at it. I took a look at their schedule. I took a look at the teams they beat. There isn't a whole lot to hang your hat on here. The best team that the Giants beat in 2007 was actually the Redskins. And this was early in the season when they had Jason Campbell at quarterback. The Redskins this year did not become really good and did not catch fire until they had to play Todd Collins at quarterback. So they didn't even get to beat the version of the Redskins that got hot at the end. They beat them when they had this quarterback who was on his way out. I remember very vividly. This was the Sean Taylor year, actually. So I don't know if you can even really count this. The irony is, the Giants' best game they played all year was actually losing to New England in Week 17. 38-35, the ultimate moral victory. Okay, that was probably the best game they played all year, period, against anybody. So, if you want to take some merit from that, then so be it. But we're looking for actual wins here. And if you want to say that the 2007 Giants beat up on mediocre to bad teams, limped into the playoffs, and then got hot, Okay, maybe we found a decent example here. But can we find any more than that? The 2010 Green Bay Packers, 10-6, wild card, got hot, won some road games in the playoffs, went to the Super Bowl, won. Another great example of a team that wasn't dominant in the regular season, but got it going in the postseason. But this team actually beat a lot of the better teams in the league. They overcame a lot of injury issues, which were a big reason why they stacked so many losses. And they were able to sneak into the playoffs, and they kind of rose to their expected level of high play once they got there. Week 1, the Packers beat the Eagles. The Eagles would go on to win their division and have a good season. They would beat the New York Jets. The Jets this year would actually make it to the AFC title game. They had a good season. 9-0. You don't see that often. They blew out the Giants in Week 16. This was actually a kind of a de facto playoff game. The Giants would end up going 10-6. They were pretty good. And I don't know if this counts because the Bears rested starters, but if you want to be complete on this, if you want to list everything, they did beat the Bears, and the Bears went 11-5. So there were some impressive victories in this forgettable Packers regular season. You could extrapolate from these few games to say this team is good and understand why they got hot at the end and won the Super Bowl. Okay, 2011 New York Giants. This is the worst team that I've ever seen win the Super Bowl. I don't even think there's an argument against it. This team had a negative point differential. This team had a lot of really bad games. This team went on a 4-game losing streak at one point. This was a very flawed team for the entire season. And then at the end, they just, I don't know where it came from, but it came from somewhere. They started playing really well, and they got hot at the end, and the rest is history, right? But even this team, even a team this, I'll call them average. This was an average regular season team. They beat the Patriots in Foxborough in Week 9. Look at this. They went into Foxborough and won a game. And this was something that had not been done for years. It was impossible to go into Foxborough back then and win. Almost never happened. And this Giants team did. The Patriots, by the way, only went on to win the AFC and almost win the Super Bowl. So they had a trophy. It wasn't a great season, regular season, but they had a trophy. And you could point to that trophy and go, I can see how this team might actually be able to compete with the big boys. And they did. Okay, next year. You guys see what I'm saying? This is like a recent thing. Mediocre or slightly above mediocre or decent teams used to not get hot like this, but nowadays, maybe I don't know if we're letting too many teams into the playoffs or what, but it happens all the time now. 2012, the Ravens, they went 10-6, nothing to write home about. Won 4 playoff games, won the Super Bowl. Not a great regular season. They had some pretty embarrassing results out there. They went on a 3-game losing streak at one point, but they at least were able to post some skins early in the season. Week 1 against the Bengals would go on to have a good season, make the wild card, blew them out, 44-13. The Bengals ended up going 10-6. And in Week 3, they beat the Patriots. The Patriots would go on to make the AFC title game and have another really good season. So the Ravens were able to get impressive wins early. Now, I don't know how well that correlates to playing really good football in the playoffs when your best wins are in September. But regardless, they are at least impressive wins. 2018 Patriots, another good example. 11-5, nothing special. Good season, not great. Good enough to win the division, good enough to not play in the wild card round, but not stellar. And this team did work against the better teams in the league. This New England Patriots team actually had some very impressive wins. Right from Week 1, they beat Houston. They had a good game against the Texans. The Texans went on to go 11-5, win the division. They beat up on the Colts in Week 5. Colts went on to go 10-6, good season. They went not into Kansas City, but they went against Kansas City, won a great regular season game, a very memorable game. Chiefs, AFC title game that year, almost made it to the Super Bowl, 12-4. And later on, the Patriots also beat the Bears. The Bears would end up going 12-4 that season, winning their division. So you can see the impressive results here. You can see the seeds of a great team. They didn't totally sprout, especially earlier on in the season. They lost some games they should have probably won. They got embarrassed here and there. But you saw the moments where they were like, hey, we're good. We're good. We promise. Just give us a chance in the playoffs and we'll prove it. And the most recent example was last year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. People forget this because they kind of brainwash you with what happens at the end of the season, but the Buccaneers started the season like 7-5. They got hot at the end. They ended up going 11-5, good record, but far from great. Not a record you would expect a team that goes on to win the Super Bowl to always have. They didn't even win their division, but they won the Super Bowl. But did they get any impressive wins? Well, mostly just one, if we're being straight honest here. But it was a big one. They went up against the Green Bay Packers and blew them out. The Packers, by the way, went 13-3, made the NFC title game. Very good Packers team. Rodgers won MVP. I don't need to tell you guys. You guys remember from last season, right? So that's pretty much every team that has ever limped their way into the playoffs or sleptwalked through the regular season and then roasted everybody on the way to the Super Bowl. Quite a few teams in recent memory, actually. It's impressive. It's interesting. But these teams, at some point, they let you know, hey, we can be good. Maybe we're not as consistent as we need to be. Maybe we have problems. Maybe there's this, that, and the other thing. Maybe we had injuries. But at some point in that regular season, they go, we belong at the big boy table. And I know some Seahawks fans out there are going to try to say, well, what about when we should have beaten the Titans? The Titans are really good. Okay, I mean, if the Seahawks almost won every game they played, they would go 0-17. So I don't really... I'm looking for an impressive win here, guys. I'm looking for an impressive win. If you say you think this team can get to the playoffs, if you want them to get in, if you're going to play the whole, hey, you get to the dance, get a ticket to the dance, you never know. Okay, but let's get a real win at some point, okay? The way I see it, you got 3 chances left. Arizona twice, if Arizona plays their starters last game, and LA. Win one of those games. We're running out of opportunities to impress anybody. We've had many opportunities to start the season. Could have beaten Tennessee, could have beaten LA, could have beaten Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Green Bay. Didn't happen. We're running out of chances to impress anybody, to show that we belong. Because I'm going to tell you this right now. I didn't go into this season with the expectation, the goal being make the playoffs. I'm not interested in making the playoffs and then losing 41-10 in the first game. I'm not interested in going to the playoffs and watching Wilson get sacked 8 times. I'm not interested in that. That's not something I'm going to take anything positive out of. So, to those of you out there, and I know there are plenty of you who exist who say that, hey, all we need is a ticket to the dance. I think you need a little bit more than that. So that's the collection of my research. That's what I did when I was bored today, basically. Thought I'd go ahead, or, well, actually yesterday I did this research. So let me know what you guys think, but I need more than just a chip in a chair. I need some statement of credibility from this team before I get excited, before I talk about the playoffs. Can't talk about the playoffs. I just hope we can win a game.